Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. Welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at the funeral prayer. So our author Imam Sharambluli says, the funeral preparations are a communal obligation, which means if no one does it, then all are sinful. So by communal obligation, he means fard kifaya. Fard ain is the onus of everybody, it's obligated upon everybody, and fard kifaya means if one member in your community does this, then all of you are absolved from sin. So it's a communal obligation. Everybody should take part in this obligation if somebody dies. It is sunnah to direct the person on his deathbed towards the Qibla such that he faces it while on his right side. It is permitted, however, to do so while he is lying on his back. So if it's easy, obviously you don't want to manipulate a man who's in the throes of death and cause him hardship, but if it's easy, you align him towards the Qibla, you align his head towards the Qibla or his body towards the Qibla. And he's on his right side. Let's move the laptop a bit here. So one should elevate the person's head with something, then he should do talqeen, which is to recite the shahada in the presence of the bedridden so that he may pronounce it. The talqeen is also to be performed after his burial. So some people, they tell the person who's dying to recite. This is not recommended to do. The person should recite it himself, and after a while, the one who's in the throes of death will pick up the rhythm and start to recite himself. The reason we don't do that is it's a very difficult time for a person. Sometimes you're very close to losing your mind. Sometimes you're in a state of anguish, turmoil, anxiety, physical pain. In this instance, they may start raving. They may start saying things which we don't judge them for. They may start saying things of kufr, right? Like this, if you don't want them to get angry or say something they don't intend about the talqeen. So that's the reason why the shahada, we don't force them to do it. You do it yourself and then they follow you. Some people, they go through the motions of what they did during their life, right? And it's because at that time you start to fall apart. You know, everything, your integrity starts to fall apart slowly. So many things will happen, and all we can do is get them into a rhythm, right? By reciting the shahada again and again in a calm, firm, slow, measured voice, where the person can pick up on it and start to recite with you. Also after the death, when you're by the side of the grave, when you've buried him, and people tend to recite then as well, as they're walking away. There is a difference of opinion on it. However, Surah Yasin you can definitely do at the grave, and we're going to mention this later on as well. And there's great reward for yourself, and there is some sort of ease also for the deceased person by you reciting Surah Yasin. Also, you can remind the dead person. So when the person is buried, you could say, your Lord is Allah. Say your Lord is Allah. Your Prophet is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You can do this at the graveside of the person as well, as a form of reminding him, because he's going to be put through the test now. Difficult questions. Man Rabbuk, Ma Dinuk, and what do you say about this person? So these are difficult questions where the tongue doesn't answer, but the heart answers. And if you've led a righteous life and a life where everything has gone smoothly, religiously for you, then in the afterlife, we hope that these questions will come very easy for you, and everything, there is a smooth transition. Whereas if you've led a difficult life Islamically in this world, and then it gets even more difficult in your grave, and it's a time of great terror and anguish, and to be able to, it's not easy to answer those questions. Even if you know the answers, the terror that overwhelms you makes it difficult for you. So we remind the dead person. When the person dies, his jaws should be closed and his eyes should be shut. It can seem ghastly and unseemly to leave the mouth open and the eyes to be staring, so we shut them. The one closing his eyes should say, in the name of Allah, on the way of the Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings be upon him. O Allah, make his affairs smooth for him, ease for him that which is to follow, make him felicitous by his meeting you, and make that which he has gone off to better than that which he has left. Next, his awra, the area from the navel to knee, should be covered. The rest of his clothes are then removed and he is given wudu, except for the rinsing of the mouth and nose. So in this instance, warm water is used just as a person would use in real life. You use warm water. The awra needs to be covered. So you remove the clothes of the deceased and the awra, which is from the navel to the knee. And there's another opinion that just the private parts need to be covered. So then the entire body is washed with water and sidr. Or something similar if it's easier. His beard and hair are washed with khitmi, a type of shampoo made from certain plants, or soap, starting with the right side. So these are herbs basically, right? Camphor, cedar, and things like this. Various herbs have properties. They perfume the body and they mask smells of decay, and they also cause a slight delay in decay also. So the hair is the beard is washed and perfumed, and the hair is washed. You start off by make the person do wudu. So you would put them through the rituals of wudu. You would not wash their nose and their mouth, but outwardly you would make them do the wudu. The entire body is washed with water and sidr, and the way the body is washed is that you turn them in a way where the right side is uppermost to you, and then you wash completely the upper side, the right hand side of the body once, and then you turn them over again and you wash their privates, and then you turn them and wash the right hand side, and then you again turn them and the left hand side, and then turn them and wash their right hand side. But before you do that, you sit them upright and you massage their belly, so that will get rid of any additional loosening of anything that's in the bowels, and then you'd clean them, and then you'd wash their right side, completely right side to the whole of the body. So basically you give them 3 thorough washings. So it's the right side completely, then it's the left side, and then again then you massage the belly, and then again it's the right side, a complete washing, 3 complete washings. Thereafter, pure water is poured over his body, beginning with the right side. So this is just the Imam explaining how the washing is done. The body is then dried with a cloth. His hair should not be combed, and his nails should not be trimmed. It's not about embellishment or beautification at this time. It's about purification. The human body, as everybody, everything that's pure before death becomes najas after death. And the human being, once he's washed again, in this manner, he becomes pure again. So the idea is just to purify the body, not as a form of embellishment or what some cultures and some people do. Even putting a turban on, we don't put a turban on. We do not trim the nails. We do not comb his. You don't comb his hair in a special sort of a combing way to make him more presentable or nothing like that. No, all you do is you basically close the mouth and you close the eyes, and that's it. The funeral shrouds should be scented with incense an odd number of times and then wrapped around the body. Hanout, which is a type of scent, is placed on his hair and beard, and camphor on his feet, knees, hands, forehead, and nose, the limbs upon which he prostrated. So it's a form of ennobling and honoring the person, that you place them on those places where he used to prostrate in his lifetime. And they have the properties of delaying somewhat the purification process as well. Now the funeral shroud, according to the Sunnah, the funeral shroud for a man consists of, it's basically 3 garments. It's a shirt, and they call it a shirt, and then they call the second garment a wrist wrapper, and then the third garment is the complete shroud. But really, they're all clothes that do not resemble what they are named. So the shirt, so it says the funeral shroud for a man consists of a shirt, an inner shroud, and an outer shroud from that which he should wear in his life. So shrouds made from white cotton are most preferred. So the kameez, the shirt, the first shroud is actually something like, I'm pointing at this, it's not this, but it's like a cloth, right? It's like a complete cloth that goes from top to bottom, and you wrap it around the person, right? It has no arms, it has no place for the head or anything. It's just a cloth that's wrapped around. Then the second, which is then the inner shroud, right, is also a garment that's wrapped completely, right? And then you have the outer shroud, which is another garment that's wrapped completely. Both the inner and outer shroud should cover the body from the top of the head to the bottom. As mentioned, wrapped completely from the top to the bottom, to the feet. The shirt should not have any sleeves, hole, or the neck or pockets, and its end should not be hemmed. It is disliked to place a turban on the head. So as mentioned, the shirt, it's not a shirt as what we know. It's actually a piece of cloth that is wrapped around here, like this. And the kind of clothing that we use for the deceased person is something that he would have worn from his particular lifestyle in his life. So an average cloth for the average man. The inner shroud is wrapped first from the left side, then from the right side. If it is feared that it will open up, the inner shroud should be tied. The inner and outer shrouds are sufficient to fulfill the obligation. So as long as you have an inner and outer shroud, that's enough to fulfill the obligation. The sunnah is 3 garments. To fulfill the sunnah for a woman's body, there's actually 5 garments. So the additional 2 garments for a woman is a wrapper that a woman wraps around her breast, and it's actually long as well. And you have like the face veil, which is actually a long garment also. So a woman is wrapped in 5 garments. 3 garments, the same as men, and then 2 additional garments. To fulfill the sunnah for a woman's body, the face should also be wrapped in a face veil, and her breast should be tied with a separate cloth. For the minimally sufficient shroud for a woman, the face veil is enough as an addition to the shrouds. The hair is tied into 2 braids. So what happens is once you put the first shroud on her, the hairs are tied into braids and placed on the front of her body. And then you put the outer garments on her, which are placed on her chest above the shirt, then the face veil above it, underneath the outer shroud, and lastly the extra cloth for her breast over the outer shroud. There is some difference of opinion on how the order of these clothes go. The bare minimum shrouding is based on whatever is available. So if somebody cannot afford even this, and a community generally cannot arrange for more clothing, as in some poor communities unfortunately, then the minimum is whatever is available to that person. The funeral prayer is a fard kifaya. It is performed by saying in one's heart, I intend to pray and supplicate for the deceased for the sake of Allah. The follower should additionally intend to pray behind the imam. So again, it's a fard kifaya, which means that if nobody turns up for the prayer, everybody's simple. If one person or a few turn up, then everybody's absolved from the sin of not having a funeral prayer performed in their locality. So after the intention, one says Allahu Akbar to begin the prayer and recites the opening supplication. The opening supplication, so you say Allahu Akbar, and then the opening supplication is Subhanak Allahumma wa bihamdik wa tabarak asmuk wa ta'ala jadduk wa la ilaha ghayruk. Then there is the Surah Fatiha, but the Surah Fatiha recited after this is not recited with the intention that it's a part of the Quran, because you are not supposed to recite the Quran in the funeral prayer. But if a Surah Fatiha is like a dua also, so if you intend it as a dua, then you can recite it. There is some ulama actually don't even allow that, but generally you can recite it if it's intended as a dua. He then recites the second takbir, after which he sends blessings upon the Prophet ﷺ. So once you've done that, then you do the second. The Imam says the second takbir. We don't move our hands, we keep our hands like this. Then you recite the supplications upon Rasulullah, Allahumma barik ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammadin kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidun Majid. And then another Allahu Akbar. This is followed by the third takbir, and then there's a dua again. O Allah, forgive him and have mercy on him, give him well-being and pardon him, honor his place of residence and make his entrance expansive. Wash him with water, ice and snow. Purify him from sins just as a white garment is purified from filth. Replace his abode with a better one, his family with a better one, and his spouse with a better one. A spouse with a better one here, that means that when he gets to meet his spouse in the hereafter, this earthly spouse, she'll be in a better form for him. His family, everybody are going to be in. Not that everything is replaced with better, his family with a better family, his spouse with a better spouse. No, that these reach him in a better state themselves for him. Enter him into paradise and save him from the punishment of the grave and that of the fire. He then recites the fourth takbir followed by the closing salam. So after the fourth takbir, nothing is recited and a salam is given. One does not seek forgiveness for a deceased child or insane person. Why? Because a young child is masum, is innocent, and an insane person didn't have the sense or the ability, he didn't have the brain faculties to know what's right and wrong, to make a sin or not make a sin. So he's absolved from everything and there's no need to pray for his forgiveness. Rather we say, oh Allah, make him a source of salvation for us as well as a reward and treasure. Make him an intercessor for us and accept his intercession. If one is buried without a funeral prayer, then it is to be performed over his grave unless the body has disintegrated. So where would this happen? If somebody were to travel to a foreign country and he dies and it's not a Muslim country and the authorities bury him there in their own tradition, there's no janazah done over him. If you arrive at that grave site 6 months or a year later, then you can do the janazah for him there. That's the only condition really where this can happen, unless you know that the body has disintegrated. How would you know that? Generally the grave digger in that area and those people responsible for the graveyards, they know how long in the kind of soil, the temperature, the humidity and everything, that how long the body will last. A miscarried fetus is prayed on if most of it came out while it was alive, before its death. Otherwise the fetus is washed, wrapped in a cloth and buried without a funeral prayer. So if most of the fetus, as mentioned before, most of the fetus would be half of the body, right? So all of the legs coming out or the top half of the body coming out. If most of the fetus came out and it was alive, signs of being alive are some movements, right? A slight breathing or a sound or quivering of the eyelids, something like this. In this instance, it's to be washed, wrapped in a cloth and buried without a funeral prayer. And if it's considered alive at that time, then the child inherits, the child passes on an inheritance, the child is named just like any other person. And the most deserving person to lead the funeral prayer is the sultan, followed by his representative, the judge, the local imam, and finally the wali, appropriate family member, in order of inheritance. That's how the ranking goes down of who leads the janazah prayer. The funeral prayer is not performed on rebels or highway brigands, as an example to everybody that this is the state that they die in, that there's nobody there to pray over them or to read their janazah. It's a warning to everybody that these kind of acts that cause hardship and suffering to population, to travelers and everybody, is not to be accepted. The funeral prayer is that it is permissible to wash and bury a non-Muslim relative without having to adhere to the sunnah way of doing so. Alternatively, the body may be given to the people of his religion. So you could wash him any way you want and then bury him, or you can alternatively, even if he's a relative, give him over to people of his own religion and let them deal with the body as they do, as per their own customs. One funeral prayer may be performed over an entire group of deceased, yet a separate prayer for each individual body is more preferable. So here, if there were a whole group of people, in this instance, they would be laid out like this, right? Obviously, with their heads orientated towards the Qibla, or they would be laid out this way. The Imam would stand like this and they'd be laid out that way in front of him, or they'd be laid out that way in front of him. And in this instance, the Imam cannot face everybody. He just faces where he's facing one person, and then the others, all of them get to be included in that janazah. When carrying the body, it is recommended to place the front right side of the coffin from the perspective of the deceased on the right shoulder of the carrier, and the left side of the left shoulder of another carrier, followed by the same for the rear end. So it seems a bit complicated here, but all the Imam means is that you pick up the body and you place it on your shoulders and you walk. And it is recommended to move fast when carrying the body, yet without it shaking. It is more preferable to walk behind the procession than in front of it. It is disliked to raise one's voice with dhikr or the like, as well as to sit down before the body is lowered into the grave. So it's a somber occasion, it's a silent occasion of reflection. You can do dhikr yourself privately, but it's not an occasion where everybody's doing loud dhikr, or you're talking loudly, or you're getting frustrated and flustered, and you're trying to hurry with the body so fast that the body actually starts shaking in the actual place that you've put it in. And obviously this isn't very seemly. But you do kind of make haste to bury that person. One of the understandings is if it's a good person, then to meet his reward earlier, and if it's a bad person, for you to be rid of him and Allah to deal with him. The grave is dug at least half a qama, body's length, into the ground. It is dug in an L shape facing the Qibla rather than straight down, except if the earth is soft. Okay, so a normal grave, what we understand to be graves are basically, we say 6 foot under, right? So 6 foot down. An Islamic grave actually is like an L, right? And the idea is that when you bury the body, you bury it into this area here. It's like a chamber now, which you seal off with unbaked bricks and whatnot. You seal it off. So the body lies in its own small chamber, right? You don't desecrate the body by piling up a ton of earth directly upon the body, right? The idea is to do that and place it in its own chamber with its on its right side facing the Qibla. Unless the earth is soft. If the earth is soft, that place is going to collapse anyway, and it's going to cause the earth above it to kind of sink down as well, then obviously in that instance, then you would bury it as I mentioned earlier, just kind of straight down. The one placing the body into the ground says, in the name of Allah, on the way of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The body is faced towards the Qibla. On its right side, the knots of the shrouds are untied and the grave is made even. The grave of women, specifically not that of a man, is covered before her body is placed in. Now, during an occasion like this, everybody's normally standing around, very eager to help out. And for a woman, obviously, when she's being placed underground, it's you just like a covering so that people cannot see. It's a private affair. People don't get to look at the shape of a body or anything. You get to lower the body into the ground, and there's like a covering there that's protecting her. Modesty. Dirt is poured into the grave and then around on its top to resemble the hump of a camel. It is prohibitively disliked to build a structure over the grave as a type of decoration. So, as a general principle, it's disliked to do this. However, if there is fear of animals, sometimes animals, they dig up, well, it's probably very rare, but if there is like a severe case of where there's a famine or something, right, animals can smell a fresh body and they could dig it up. Sometimes you get body snatchers, right? You get sick, evil men that have been known to dig up bodies to desecrate the body or to sell the body, as it was done in the Victorian era, to scientists, or even to steal the shroud, right? In the earlier periods, before bodies were needed for medical experiments, sometimes bodies were dug up to steal the shroud, because obviously it's cloth, it's 3 to 5 pieces of cloth, and they hold a monetary value in a society where cloth not everybody could afford many pieces of cloth. It's permitted to mark the grave with a structure if the man is known and righteous, so they can come to visit. So if it's a holy man, a pious man, a scholar, it's permitted to build something over it so that to identify it, so people can come and visit and make dua for him and everything. Come and pay homage. If there is a legitimate need, it is permissible to bury multiple bodies in one grave. In that case, sand and dirt are used to make a barrier between each body. So like in times of war, in times of plague, in times of natural disasters, where all of a sudden you have something like 10,000 bodies to bury, and you need to bury them within a day or two. If you don't, then disease can spread, right? So in an instance like this, you have no choice but to dig a huge pit and then lay the bodies out next to each other, and there's nothing wrong in doing that. Also, once a body completely disintegrates, so after 100 years or something, there's a finite space in a graveyard. So naturally, you're going to get bodies being buried on areas where there were bodies before. But if the body is completely disintegrated, then there's nothing left. You basically bury somebody else in the same spot. It is not permitted to transfer the corpse after its burial unless the land turns out to be stolen. To transfer the corpse, if a person dies in one area, you can only really transfer the corpse to about 2.33 miles away. Now, the understanding behind that is that traditionally in medieval towns, the graveyards were outside of the towns, right? So they would be at a distance of about 2 miles away. So you can move the body, like in an instance where a person dies in one place, and you can move the body outside of the town to the graveyard. And obviously today, where we live in large cities and Muslim graveyards are outside the city or miles away, by extension, you could also move the body a distance to bury the body. But once the body is buried, you do not dig the body up unless it is you realize that the land happened to be usurped or stolen, right? So then it wasn't dedicated, it wasn't supposed to be dedicated as a graveyard, right? It was somebody's land and it was usurped from them, taken from them. In that instance, unfortunately, you'll have to dig up the body and move the body. It is recommended to visit graves and to recite Surah Yasin even if sitting next to them, due to that which has been narrated, namely, whoever visits graves and recites Surah Yasin, then on that day Allah will lighten the affair of them and He will give as many good deeds as there are deceased in that graveyard. So it's a great act, it's a virtuous act to recite Surah Yasin when the person is dying in the throes of death and when the person has passed away. When you go to visit them, to sit at the graveside and recite Surah Yasin, it not only comforts the dead and helps them, but you also get the reward of every other person present in that graveyard also. It is disliked to sit at graves for other than reciting the Quran, to walk on them, or to pluck out wet grass from graveyard. Now, wet grass is living, right? It's green. By extension, anything, any flowers, plants, grass on the grave, you do not pluck them out. And the basis of this is the hadith of Rasulullah where him and a few companions were passing by two graves, and he saw that the two companions, the owners of that grave, were being punished. And they were being punished for, one was for childbearing and the other one was for not being careful about urination and keeping himself pure. So Rasulullah took a palm frond, broke it in half, placed one in one grave and one in one grave, and he told the companions that as long as they remain green, they remain alive, they shall not be punished. So it's good to plant, actually. It's good to plant fresh flowers and everything around the grave, and certainly we don't pluck any plants or the like from graves. So now we move on to the final section on the funeral prayer, which is the section on martyrs. A martyr is one who is killed by any enemy combatants, rebels, highway brigands or robbers in his house or at night, even if killed by a heavy object or killed unjustly by a Muslim with a sharp object. So there are many ways a person can become a martyr, and if they're killed in any of these ways, and then you know that there's a martyr, because somebody could be a martyr in a way where you don't know, right? So you don't know the state of anybody. If they don't fulfill this criteria, even if they're a martyr, you bury them. If they're shaheed, you bury them as per a normal person is buried. But if they specifically die in any of these instances, then there's a slightly different way in how we approach this, which we're going to have a look at now. So a martyr is one who is killed by enemy combatants. So war, right? That's straightforward. War, or in defense of your land in a war. Rebels. So rebels that are causing sedation in your land. Highway robbers, brigands, thieves. Somebody breaking into your house at night time and you having to defend it. Even if killed by a heavy object or killed unjustly by a Muslim with a sharp object. What the author means here is a sharp object basically with the intent to kill, right? So if two people are fighting, so if you decide to fight your neighbor and your neighbor pulls out a hoe or a stick from the garden and crashes it over your head, and he didn't intend to kill you, right? But you ended up dying. In this case, you're not considered a martyr because there was no intent. A sharp object means what? A knife, a gun, something that's used to inflict severe harm and death. If somebody decides to stab you, they know what they're doing, they know the consequences. If somebody decides to shoot you, they know the consequences. It's basically death. They know they're intending to kill you. So this is what the author intends here. Even if killed by a heavy object. If somebody intends to kill you with a hammer, and they know that if they deliberately hit you over the head so hard, they're going to kill you. The same ruling applies. The martyr is buried with his blood in his clothes, and he is prayed on without being washed. So a martyr is the way you find him, is the way you bury him. Why? Because he died in a noble state, he died doing something very noble, and then you keep him in that state, and then you bury him in that state. So there's no washing him, there's no changing his clothes, there's no drying or wiping of the blood. However you find him is how you bury him. Sometimes you're going to find body parts, unfortunately, and then you just collect them up and then you bury them as they are. And he's prayed over without being washed. His weapons, armor, wool and stuffed garments are removed for obvious reasons. If, however, he is killed in a state of major ritual impurity, if he were a child, then the body is washed. There's a famous story about one of the companions who had recently got married, and he ended up going to the battlefield before he had the chance to have the ghusl, and Rasul saw the angels come and give him a bath. A man in need of an obligatory bath here, a menstruating woman, or a woman who's just given birth, and if it's known, then you'd give her the obligatory bath before burying her. Because a woman who dies in childbirth is considered a martyr. The same is true for one who meets some comfort of life after the battle ends, whether by eating, drinking, sleeping, being given medicine, having a prayer time pass over him while being conscious, or being transferred from the battlefield while alive, other than out of fear of being trampled on by animals. Anybody killed by had, penal punishments, or qisas is washed after death. So in the top instance, if there's a delay between him dying, so if someone's on the battlefield and then there's a delay. What is a delay? Like something happens that is different from that situation. So someone's severely injured, but then a prayer time elapses, right, which is a few hours, or they're able to eat a complete meal, or something like this. Sleep overcomes sleeping, a period of sleep, or giving medicine, having a prayer time pass. In this instance, you would also wash their body. And anyone killed by had or penal punishments or qisas, retaliatory punishments, is washed after death. So if someone is killed by had punishment, the hudud are the penal punishments in Islam. If somebody is, for example, stoned to death, we don't look upon that person with contempt. Why? Because they've purified themselves. How is somebody condemned for adultery anyway? They have to admit it, right? They have to admit that themselves, because no one's going to know what happened in private. They have to feel so much remorse and shame that they come forward saying, listen, we don't want to be punished in the hereafter. We admit our crime now. Give us the punishment which Allah has ordained for us. So in this instance, their repentance is so manifest and so strong that we don't look upon them as someone who's a sinner or a bad person. We look at them with mercy, and someone who's been purified by Allah. Also as a retaliatory punishment. So a murderer who killed somebody else, and then he's being punished by the state now. Again, in this instance, or even if a murderer kills someone and then the town gets together to punish him or to lynch him. In these instances, these people are still human beings, right? They still have a certain dignity, right? They still have a certain like ennobling thing about them, that they are still the slaves of Allah. They are still Bani Adam. They are the children of Adam alayhi salam. So we don't desecrate the bodies. We don't disregard the bodies. No, we wash them. We perform the Janaza over them as if they're Muslims. And as mentioned earlier, even if there's a non-Muslim, you wash them and perform. You obviously wouldn't perform Janaza for them, but you'd certainly wash them and bury them. That's all. Thank you very much for watching. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.